Our audience, let's just watch. The first plane smashing into the World Trade Center. We've seen video throughout the day of the second plane that went into the World Trade Center. When you see that, Commissioner Kelly, when you see these horrific pictures that none of us can comprehend, how do you explain what this enormity of this tragedy was?
Well, you can't explain it. It is, the enormity is just mind-boggling. I think we think in the abstract of terrorist attacks. But when you see this, when actually you see the film of Plane 1, Plane 2, and then the collapse of the buildings, I mean, the world witnessed this. Terrorist attacks often happen in the dark of night. But here, everybody throughout the world, the civilized world, has seen this. And it's just incredible.
And is it fair to assume, Commissioner Kelly, that life in New York City will never again be the same?
Well, I don't know. New Yorkers, Americans are pretty resilient, pretty tough. I think certainly for the short term, life is going to change significantly. But I hope it doesn't change too drastically, because then the terrorists have won. They've accomplished what they set out to do, and that is to significantly alter our way of life. So I think we have...
And welcome back to our local coverage of the assault on America here on News Channel 11. We're breaking in right now into CNN's coverage because a number of you have called us here at the TV station concerned about aircraft in the sky. As you know, the FAA grounded aircraft earlier today, and a lot of you are wondering what it is you're seeing up there.
Understandably, a great deal of concern from the community in the South Bay with those calls coming in. We have spoken to officials at San Jose International Airport, and they say that the aircraft in the air is military aircraft, life flights, helicopters, but no need to be worried, no need to be concerned tonight. Every aircraft that is in the air, it has authorization to be in the air.
But even as firefighters and others tried to reach them, first one tower,
good Lord,
then minutes later, the second tower collapsed.
There are no words.
Debris rained down on people who had escaped the Trade Center and on their rescuers. Many could only run to get away from choking dust and smoke from fires. Many of those who escaped the jet crashes and building collapse were severely injured, severely burned. Hundreds were evacuated to hospitals. Even New York's hardened mayor was stunned by the horror of the attack.
I've never seen anything like this. I was there from shortly after it happened and saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. It's a horrible, horrible situation.
A third building in the World Trade Center complex collapsed later this afternoon. The building had already been evacuated. In Washington, a wing of the Pentagon was in flames after taking a direct, devastating hit from another hijacked jetliner minutes after the World Trade Center was targeted. The terrorist attack quickly spread fear and chaos in the nation's capital. Congressional leaders were evacuated to safe areas. The nation's military moved to high alert. A fourth hijacked jetliner, United Flight 93, headed from New Jersey to San Francisco with 45 people on board, crashed near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, 80 miles south of Pittsburgh. The military believes it was headed to the presidential retreat, Camp David, Maryland, when it went down. President Bush, who has been taken to a safe location, vowed this will not go unpunished.
And have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand.
But even as the president asked for a moment of silence for the victims, there were already demands that those to blame be tracked down and punished. Administration officials suspect Islamic fundamentalist Osama bin Laden is behind the deadly attack. Bin Laden is a multimillionaire Saudi exile hiding in Afghanistan, whose followers reportedly see attacks on the U.S. as the ultimate holy war.
Government sources in Afghanistan deny bin Laden is involved in the attacks. However, one of his supporters was scheduled to be sentenced today in New York to life in prison for his role in the 1998 bombings to the 2 U.S. embassies. Lisa, this is really hard to believe.
It is. Thanks a lot, Greg. Now, 4 separate hijacked planes crashed today, killing all 266 people on board. American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles slammed into the North Tower of the New York Trade Center at 5:48 this morning, our time. 92 people were on board. 17 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175, also from Boston to Los Angeles, slammed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center, killing 65 people. American Airlines Flight 77 from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles crashed into the Pentagon around 6:45 this morning. 64 people were on board there. And United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco crashed southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at 7:20 this morning Pacific time. 45 people died on that flight.
America's peaceful existence here has been shaken today. This is something no one has seen before. The likes of this are unparalleled. The president himself and the leaders in Washington challenged to come to grips with how this country will respond and recover from this attack today that killed so many people, the President of the United States.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight, I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you. Good night, and God bless America.
President Bush addressing the nation tonight. I think the most important thing that I picked up from there was he said that the U.S. would not distinguish between those who committed these terrorist acts and those who harbored them. That means, as Secretary Rumsfeld said earlier, that if it is found that a country was harboring the people who committed these acts, we would then take action against that country and its government.
Right now, while there is so much speculation as to which group could have done something like this all day, government officials have been pointing to Osama bin Laden, who has been known to be hiding in Afghanistan. But of course, Afghanistan said that they had no part in this.
Yeah, well, Afghanistan is at a civil war, too, so who speaks for Afghanistan? Who speaks for Osama bin Laden? The great question. Washington officials, of course, did turn their eye to the fugitive terrorist Osama bin Laden, and he made it to the top of the list of possible suspects. A U.S. judge had set tomorrow as the sentencing date for a bin Laden associate for his role in a bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Tanzania. That bombing killed 213 people, that and the one in Nairobi, Kenya. No one from the U.S. Attorney's Office could be reached to comment on whether the sentencing was still on. Osama bin Laden's associates had said in a London newspaper 3 weeks ago that the U.S. would suffer a major terrorist attack. One word of the attack made it to the West Bank in the Middle East. Palestinians were in the streets celebrating. In one city, about 3,000 people poured out of their homes and businesses chanting, "God is great," and handing out candy, a traditional gesture of celebration. However, Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat said he is shocked by the attacks, and he said he sends his condolences to the American people.
Well, the Bay Area is full of people with roots in the Middle East, and tonight, many of those people are scared. Threatening phone calls to this downtown San Francisco mosque. There it is, prompted extra security. Arab Americans are bracing for a backlash similar to the finger-pointing hysteria that followed the Oklahoma City bombing. American citizens of Arab descent, both Muslim and Christian, are as grief-stricken and outraged as any other American at these terrorist attacks.
And from what we're hearing right now, the FAA is saying 9 in the morning earliest for commercial flights to begin. Of course, we'll be updating that time for you as the evening goes on. We're going to send you back now to CNN. We'll have continuing coverage of the local angle of this story coming up on News Channel 11 at 10 o'clock and at 11 o'clock.
Fusion and the chaos and the speed of these events unfolding today revealed a situation that remains really, truly breathtaking and incomprehensible, but that there are some leads. Let me tell you what this official said. First of all, on one of the planes that was hijacked, Wolf, and we don't know which one, there was a keyed microphone open, so there were sounds and some discussion and some noise in the background. Apparently that was heard. This official, who has been carefully briefed on this, describes what was heard as duress. And of course, investigators are going to be listening very closely to that. Secondly, this official says there is, quote, credible information and leads that are being developed and pursued that gives law enforcement a feeling of some degree of confidence that their investigation will move forward. It would not provide details. We've heard just a little while ago of some arrests in New Jersey. I can't tell you whether those pieces of information are related. Beyond that, some more information, again, as to the speed with which things occurred. There were 4 hijacked jetliners today, as we know. This official says there were no transponder codes indicating hijacking activity punched in on any of those planes. There's a 4-digit code, Wolf, that pilots can punch in, so it's almost a covert notification that a hijacking is underway. That did not happen in any of the cases today. This official says that at one point, government officials today feared there were as many as 7 hijacked jetliners. Obviously, there turned out to be just 4. But 4 is way too many and has led to this terrible tragedy that we've witnessed here today. So, Wolf, the investigation continuing in rapid fire. This official says that a judgment will be made in the morning, looking very carefully at the airports and airspace across the country as to when air traffic in the U.S. Can resume.
Several of those airplanes bound for California. Our affiliate in San Francisco, KTVU, has done an interview with a woman by the name of Alice Hoagland. She's a flight attendant. Her son, Mark Bingham, was on board United Airlines Flight 93 today, bound for San Francisco. Apparently, he used the plane's airphone to call his mother in San Francisco shortly before that plane crashed in western Pennsylvania. Among other things, he told his mother that 3 men were on board and they had threatened with a bomb. Hear that interview from KTVU, Alice Hoagland, followed by Kathleen Hoagland, who is the aunt of Mark Bingham on board that flight.
That I love you very, very much in case I don't see you again.
I said that.
That the plane has been taken over by hijackers. And then I said, well, we love you very much too, Mark. Let me go get your mother.
I got on the phone, Mark, and he said, hi, Mom, this is Mark Bingham. Give me his last name. And he said, I want to let you know that I love you. And I'm flying. I think he said I'm in the air. I'm phone of the airplane.
In his seat.
I presume so. He said, I want you to know I love you very much, and I'm calling you from the plane. We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb. And I said, well, who are they, Mark? And he repeated that he loved me, and he said, I don't think he said, I don't know who they are. He became distracted there as if someone was speaking to him, and he said, it's something to the effect of, it's true. And then the phone went dead.
Alice Hoagland, Kathleen Hoagland. Mark Bingham on board United Airlines Flight 93, again, that went down today with several others in western Pennsylvania. The first of many stories we'll be hearing throughout the evening and into tomorrow and the rest of the week here. Also, the brother of the pilot on American Airlines Flight 11 says he had a, quote, sinking feeling when he heard about this morning's terrorist attacks. Jim Oganowski's brother, John, was the pilot of the first plane to hit one of the World Trade Centers today. Flight 11 was traveling from Boston, bound for L.A., 92 people on board. Oganowski says his brother was a former Air Force pilot who had just celebrated a birthday.
I ask all of you for your prayers for, as I refer to him, as Brother John. And I ask you to also pray for our whole country today in this tragedy that's impacting our whole country.
Dr. Mark Heath was right next to the building when he shot these pictures.
I hope I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind the car. It's incredible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go find people who need help, because I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Can I get a toot? I'm just getting a couple of clean breaths. That's good. Okay. Back to you.
Yeah, Mike! Mike! Mike, come over here! Yeah!
Anybody need a doctor?
Where are you?
Don't have oxygen.
Hello, Doc.
Hey. That guy needs some oxygen. If someone can share it with him.
10-4.
Thanks. We just heard another explosion. They're handing out gloves and masks. The consensus is it's too unsafe to go in there. Just going to wait here until they bring some people out.
Used our own planes against us and our own people. And I hope the president does do something besides just think about what he's going to do.
And there should be an atomic bomb on its way to Afghanistan.
Try to find out who's responsible and then maybe take the appropriate action at that time. I don't think it's really time to just, jump the gun.
Someone's going to pay. I don't know who, but someone's going to pay.
Today's devastation in New York City and near Washington, D.C. was horrible enough to rock us here 3,000 miles away on the opposite side of the continent.
Invaded, and then looking in the rearview mirrors, we could see that the tower just collapsing, dust and debris for blocks. We couldn't see anything. It was pitch black.
I'm standing next to a couple of high-ranking firefighters, and I don't know if they've made it. There's a search and rescue going on for them now. I mean, they're the real heroes today. These guys went into buildings that were burning and didn't think twice. I mean, even when the buildings were going up, you watched some of them protecting other people with their bodies. And it's just, these guys are unbelievable heroes.
I had just gotten out of the building. I was crossing the street when I heard some rumbling. I saw someone coming off the top of the building. I just ran.
Yeah, come through it. We got a package over here. Back up. Back the other way.
We're missing a lot of people. There's a lot of cops and firemen missing. I did hear that there's one battalion missing, and it's just a very sad day.
The people in New York City can demonstrate our resolve and our support for all the people that were viciously attacked today by going about their lives and showing everyone that vicious, cowardly terrorists can't stop us from being a free country and a place that functions.
It's pretty devastating, Both towers are down. I think it's pretty amazing. I don't know. We'll recover.
The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center were among the most massive structures in the world designed to withstand tremendous forces. So the question tonight is, what caused them to come down? It took 1 hour and 44 minutes for the North Tower to collapse after being hit. Just 47 minutes for the South Tower. A Bay Area engineer who specializes in building failure says he suspects the impacts of the jets alone did not cause the structures to crumble.
It's the largest probably building failure ever, caused obviously by a terrorist act. Those two buildings are about 110 stories high population, state-of-the-art buildings, but they were never designed to take the impact of a large airplane or an inferno such as happened following the collision.
Yano says he suspects the intense heat of the fire melted critical support columns in both buildings, ultimately causing the collapse. In addition, he says the South Tower, the quickest to collapse, was hit on a corner, destroying important support beams and hastening the destruction. The World Trade Center was made up of 7 buildings, including the twin 110-floor towers.
Californians to be calm, if they can, to spend this day with their family, and above all else, to say a prayer for the many victims of this dastardly act.
He also cautioned against any acts of reprisal aimed at Americans of Middle Eastern descent.
And we need to let the federal government determine who the culprits are that caused this unspeakable act and let them develop a plan for decisive and coordinated action. We do not want Americans turning on Americans. We do not want reprisals within our borders or within the American borders.
Transportation, power, and water systems may be monitored and guarded for some time, but Governor Davis says as long as there are no more terrorist acts tonight, all state buildings will be reopened tomorrow.
Senate chaplain said on November 22nd, 1963, when John Kennedy died, he said, "We gaze at a vacant space against the sky," which is what all of America and the world is doing now. And then he added, "But God lives, and the government of Washington still stands." David McCullough, is there any doubt, given this country, that we will, in the most important sense, get through the horror that we are witnessing now?
No doubt whatsoever. No doubt whatsoever. We are much stronger, much more resilient.
much more deeply, profoundly, truly patriotic country than we like to admit. And it's going to change the whole nature of what happens in this city of Washington in the next several days and probably for years to come. And I was reminded today of something Churchill said during the war when he came across the Atlantic. I think he said it in Canada, but he was speaking for both the Canadian and the American people. He said, "We haven't journeyed this far because we're made of sugar candy."
That's true also. David Halberstam was a New Yorker of the city at a time when small events would move us.
Oh, no. New chapter in history. I mean, it was, the Cold War had its own fears, a bipolar world. But in some ways, it was a safer world. I mean, it was more controlled. Now it's more fragmented, it's more volatile, and this is an act of war, and a kind of war to which we are sort of uniquely vulnerable because the magnetic field of our power and our intelligence is very frail as you get deeper into what is apparently the place of origin of this terrorism. So there's, how do we manifest our power, which is very real, in a place so far in distance? It's a very, you start the day numbed by it, and then the magnitude of what it means and how it changes life. A free and open society being challenged by this kind of terrorism to continue the freedom of movement and access, which is so elemental to the way we live.
Right now, we are going to listen to Maria Hinojosa's report, who will give you a perspective on exactly what happened after these initial attacks and how New Yorkers reacted to them.
At Ground Zero, running in the streets is the only form of escape. But on those same streets, the chaos and vibrations couldn't be avoided. Further north, New Yorkers gathered at Times Square. In humble silence and disbelief, everyone looking up to the big screen. Downtown, the mass exodus began.
I saw everybody crying in the streets, saying their prayers and crying. I saw different races, nationalities, and creeds that usually have differences with one another come together and bond and love and respect.
Along Fifth Avenue, people flooded to the streets to watch together.
Oh my God, it's inside the first building.
The faces of New Yorkers, solemn, quiet, praying. A father trying to give security to the innocent ones. The tiniest of faces, protected. Streets filled with anger and shock.
I have never witnessed nothing like this in my entire life. Human beings, parents, daughters and sons jumping out of the window at least from 80-something floors. None of you want to witness that. I'm traumatized for life.
The street where now everyone shares the pain out in the open without shame. The street where office chairs have become eerie stretchers outside a hospital.
We've had multiple types of injuries, from severe burns to blunt injuries and multiple fractures.
The street where a depleted mayor summons some strength.
New York City is a lot stronger than this, and we're going to overcome it, and the people of New York City are going to give an example of how you stand up to terrorism. You just don't be afraid.
But Times Square is empty, the streets are silent, and a city mourns. Maria Hinojosa, CNN, New York.
Garrick, if I can, let me interrupt you. This is Jim Clancy. Let me just interrupt you for a minute, because we have a new piece of footage that has come in that gives us another perspective, yet another perspective of the tragedy as it was literally unfolding this day, showing that second plane from a different angle as it slammed into the they were rewinding the tape there, but an incredible angle showing that plane as it came in very low. You could see how low it was. Apparently they're from Battery Park. Taking a look. Can we roll it again, please?
Nothing more to say, except just one detail, which I think has been reported, but I might offer some clarity, Jim and Colleen. That was the second plane that struck the trade of the towers. It came from the south over New York Harbor, which is the normal direction the planes approach for landings at LaGuardia Airport. Planes coming into Kennedy don't fly over Manhattan. Planes coming into LaGuardia do fly up the Hudson River on this side or the East River on that side. So a plane coming from the south You'd say he's off course, but that's the way planes do make their approach. But that first plane at 8:45 this morning, it came from the other direction. It was going up a one-way street, so to speak. It came from the north, which is here, straight down over the center of Manhattan into that tower. We saw that image just a few minutes ago. So it was going against traffic. Everybody who looked up and caught a glimpse of that plane flying at hundreds of miles an hour in Manhattan knew instantly something was wrong. That plane had no business being there, but it was, and that's the result.
Garrick, as awful and as horrendous as what this country has seen, what the world has seen already today, I suppose come daylight tomorrow, when day starts breaking behind you there, it starts to get really grim, doesn't it? Because people may get a better sense of the devastation, a better sense of the toll in terms of human life.
Well, we don't know when officials will start to make any kind of an estimate on how many lives have been lost. The search, of course, will begin. It's going to be long and arduous because we've seen how much rubble is down there, and nobody's even guessing how long it'll take to go through the rubble. One way of approaching a figure of human loss will be by taking a survey or an inventory, a census, if you will. Each company, each floor had offices, companies, people working there. They know how many employees were there. They know who didn't come home. That's the kind of statistics, the numbers, the body count, sad to say, that'll be made starting tomorrow morning. Back to you.
Garrick Utley, thanks.
Thanks for that, Garrick. Well, of course, President Bush was in Florida at the time of the attacks. For security reasons, he did not return to Washington, at least at first. Instead, Air Force One flew to an Air Force base in Louisiana and then on to another in Nebraska. Then at dusk, the president finally returned to Washington, his plane accompanied by jet fighters. At the White House, he addressed a nation traumatized by a day of tragedy.
Now let me turn this podium over to FBI Director Bob Mueller to talk more about the investigation itself.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. I want to start by saying that the men and women of the FBI join the nation in expressing our deep sympathies for the victims of these horrific tragedies and their families. And we, all of us in the FBI, pledge to those directly affected by these attacks that we will leave no stone unturned in our quest to help find those responsible and to bring those individuals to justice. Let me turn, if I could, for a moment to the effort that we have undertaken at the FBI to investigate these tragedies. Early after the planes started to fall yesterday, as soon as we heard that there was a particular city that was either a city of origin for a flight or a city such as New York where a flight went in, we established command posts. We have at those command posts and at a number of offices around the country where there are leads, more than 4,000 special agents who are assigned to assist this investigation. 4,000 special agents and 3,000 support personnel. We have over 400 of our laboratory personnel deployed at the crime scenes in New York City, south of Johnstown in Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon. And we anticipate this level of resource commitment will continue for the immediate future. In the last 24 hours, we have been addressing two objectives. The first objective is to determine, identify the hijackers on each of the planes. Having identified the hijackers on each of the planes, we then have sought to identify any of their associates remaining in the United States. Our first effort is to identify any associates in the United States who might be related to the hijackers and to remove those associates, investigate, and arrest, given the evidence, those individuals, and to remove any threat to the air system in the future. That is our first objective. The second objective is to gather any and all evidence we have as to whom assisted the hijackers, and not only in this country, but also overseas. We have, in the last 24 hours, taken the manifests and used those as an evidentiary base, and have talked to many of the families of the victims, and have successfully, I believe, identified many of the hijackers on each of the 4 flights that went down. We also have identified through a number of leads, principally at the cities of origin, a number of individuals whom we believe may have had something to do with the hijackings, and we are pursuing those leads aggressively. Let me conclude at this juncture by emphasizing again the FBI's total and unwavering commitment to this investigation. We will not stop, and as I said before, we will leave no stone unturned until we have determined who was responsible for these attacks on our freedom. Now, I would be happy to entertain questions, as I'm sure the Attorney General would.
Director, have there been any arrests of any of these associates that you've identified
Now, I understand that that there is reporting out there that the FBI has made arrests with regard to the hijacking. That is not accurate. There have been occasions where we have interviewed individuals and come to find that the individual is out of status, and that individual has been detained on an immigration hold. But there have been no arrests relating to these hijackings at this point.
Talked to and the people that you've identified, are these people that have been under FBI's watch in the past relating to other kinds of terrorism activities? Are they people who you're familiar with?
As we identify names, there may be one or more individuals with whom we have information as to involvement with individual terrorist groups.
We've seen activity today in Boston, Rhode Island, and in southern Florida. Can you walk us through, in any of these cases, and give us any guidance on why these particular individuals have been stopped and what the FBI is doing?
We have in Boston, my understanding also in Providence and also in Miami, we have leads indicating the presence at some point in time of either the hijackers themselves, and we are attempting to recreate the travels of each of the hijackers on the planes, either the hijackers themselves or their associates. And consequently, we are following all leads with interviews, with search warrants, and whatever investigative techniques are necessary to obtain the evidence.
They've got to get to the White House for a meeting.
How many?
How many associates, Mr. Mueller, do you think? And how many were workers at the airport?
I can't give you a definitive number on the associates. Thank you very much.
Lisa, there are so many horrific details involved in these terrorist attacks, and there will still be more to come. Right now, we want to show you some of the major events that are affecting the lives of countless Americans. The most vicious terrorist attack ever on U.S. soil began just as the workday was starting in New York City. Around 5:45 this morning West Coast time, American Airlines Flight 11, carrying 92 people from Boston to L.A., crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Then at 6:03, United Airlines Flight 175, carrying 65 people from Boston to L.A., crashes in the South Tower of the World Trade Center. That triggers an explosion, bursting the building's upper floors. This home video shows what it felt like for people on the streets of Manhattan.
I hope I live. It's coming down on me.
As stunned New Yorkers searched for safe shelter, President Bush makes a brief statement calling the crashes an apparent terrorist attack. At 6:40, trading comes to a swift halt on Wall Street. All U.S. markets are ordered closed for the day. Then at 6:43, yet another jetliner crashes, this one into the Pentagon. American Airlines Flight 77, carrying 64 people from Washington to L.A. At 6:49, the Federal Aviation Administration grounds all takeoffs and landings. International flights are told to land in Canada.
Picture from the scene of the plane crash.
At 7:10, another jetliner crashes. This one slams into the ground about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. United Flight 93 was bound for San Francisco from Newark, New Jersey.
Good Lord.
Between 6:50 and 7:30, the North and South Towers collapse. These buildings were once the tallest in the world. Smoke and dust from their collapse billows across the part of Manhattan known as the city's financial district. Between 7:30 and 8:30, government buildings around the country are evacuated, including the U.S. Capitol and the White House. New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani calls for evacuation of Lower Manhattan. Around 11:20, President Bush leaves Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana for a secure, undisclosed location. Around 11:50, the Navy dispatches missile destroyers and other equipment to New York and Washington. At 2:25 p.m. West Coast time, a third building at the World Trade Center collapses. Just after 3 o'clock, there's word of explosions in Afghanistan. That's where suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden is believed to be hiding. The U.S., Taliban rulers, and rebel forces all deny having any role in the fighting. There were apparently no sounds of airplanes or anti-aircraft fire.
You see the president there emerging from Marine One.
Around 4 o'clock, President Bush arrives back at the White House in Marine One, an hour and a half before addressing the nation from the Oval Office.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror.
The president went on to say our nation witnessed evil today and promised the United States would retaliate against those behind the terrible acts.
President Bush says the government offices closed after the assaults on the World Trade Center and Pentagon will be open tomorrow. Bush, who is spending the night at the White House, had a late-night National Security Council meeting. Brad?
Okay, thank you, Susan. To recap again, there were 4 airplanes involved in this massive terrorist attack. The first plane to go down, American Airlines Flight 11. It was en route from Boston to Los Angeles. It crashed into the World Trade Center around 5:48 this morning, our time. 92 people were on board. United Flight 175 crashed into the World Trade Center about 15 minutes later. That flight also took off from Boston and was also bound for Los Angeles. 65 people were on that flight. At 6:45 our time this morning, American Airlines Flight 77 en route from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles crashed into the Pentagon. 64 people were on that flight. And United Flight 93, which took off from Newark, New Jersey, headed to San Francisco, crashed about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. That was around 7:20 this morning, our time. 45 people, including some from the Bay Area, were on that flight. In fact, we'll have more on one of the victims in a moment. We do know that there were 266 people on those flights who died. At least 50,000 people work in the World Trade Center buildings. That's not counting any tourists who were there at the time of the attack. We have no idea what the death toll is in the Trade Center, and more than 300 police and fire personnel in New York City are missing. We are getting word that 3 top New York City Fire Department officials died at the scene of that deadly attack in the World Trade Center in New York. There's no word yet on how many others were dead or injured. However, we are hearing there are some survivors from the attack. Apparently, 2 people in the rubble have used their cell phones to call out. Rescuers are now looking for them. Also, 2 Port Authority police officers have been pulled from the rubble alive. However, we do not know their conditions. And the New York City Police Commissioner says there are also people alive in some nearby downtown buildings. Also, CNN is reporting that up to 800 people are missing in the big fire and explosion at the Pentagon. This is video of the burning building from earlier today after the hijacked jet crashed into it. A Pentagon spokesman is quoted as saying between 100 and 800 staff are missing and feared dead. The Pentagon employs more than 20,000 civilians and military personnel. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld says the Pentagon is functioning and it will be open for business tomorrow. The fight against terror is an international struggle of the free world against the forces of darkness who seek to destroy our liberty and our way of life. I believe that together we can defeat these forces of evil. At this most difficult hour, all Israelis stand as one
with the American people. Our hearts are with you, and we are ready to provide any assistance at any time. The government of Israel has declared a day of mourning tomorrow as we bow our heads and share in the sorrow of the American people.
It's important to note, too, Israel has been on a heightened state of alert. Now, at the same time, Palestinian Authority President Yasser Arafat denouncing the attacks, calling them a crime against humanity.
It is very difficult for me personally, for anyone, to speak about what had happened. It is not only against the Americans. It is not only against the American people or against the American government. It is against the whole international human being. Unbelievable, unbelievable. I am sending my condolences for President Bush, for his government, for his American people, for this unbelievable disaster what happened. This is touching our hearts, and this is very difficult to explain my feelings, my pain. God help them. God help them. God help them.
Arafat offered help in tracking down those responsible. Several radical Palestinian groups, including Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, have denied any involvement.
All right, let's talk a little bit now about the reaction in Europe. European leaders unanimous in their condemnation of the attacks. British newspapers all carried pictures on the front page of their morning edition. Messages of condolences and expressions of support poured in.
This is not a battle between the United States of America and terrorism, but between the free and democratic world and terrorism. We therefore here in Britain stand shoulder to shoulder with our American friends in this hour of tragedy, and we, like them, will not rest until this evil is driven from our world.
В борьбе с террором, с этой чумой 21 века.
It is an impudent challenge thrown down to all humanity, at least to civilized humanity. And what has happened today once again emphasizes actuality of Russia's proposal to unite efforts of the international community to fight with terrorism, with this plague of the 21st century. Russia has experienced terrorism, and that is why we exactly understand the feelings of the American people. Addressing the people of the United States on behalf of the people of Russia, I would like to say that we are with you, and we share and feel your pain in full. We support you.
Avec une immense émotion que la France vient d'apprendre ces attentats monstrueux.
It is with enormous emotion that France has just learned of these monstrous attacks. There is no other word that have struck the United States of America. And in these unbelievable circumstances, the entire French people, I can state, are with the American people. I express our friendship and our solidarity in this tragedy. I assure President George Bush, of course, of my total support. France, you know, has always condemned terrorism and condemns it unequivocally and believes it must be fought in every way. That is why I'm asking you to excuse me immediately. I have to return to Paris.
Dies ist eine Kriegserklärung gegen die gesamte zivilisierte Welt.
This is a declaration of war against all civil societies. Whoever helps these terrorists or protects them goes against all fundamental values on which the coexistence of nations is founded. The German people support the American people in this hour that is so difficult for the people in the United States. We remain strongly committed to the United States of America.
An act of unspeakable violence took place today.
And this is a moment where people are reflecting on the nature of that tragedy and standing firm against that kind of violence and with the people who have suffered from it.
I want to express, in the name of the European Union, our entire solidarity with the United States, with our American friends, and with the American people, with our allies.
Well, perhaps you can imagine how much the attack on the World Trade Center has unnerved global financial markets. Already feel fearful of recession, and of course some of those markets around the world are open now. Richard Quest in London has been monitoring the situation there for us. Richard?
Good morning, Colleen. This was, of course, an attack right on the very heart of the World Centre for Capitalism. So it's not surprising that as soon as the news became clear, there were very sharp falls in share prices across Europe, and that's been seen again in Asia overnight. Let me update you briefly. Tokyo's stock market is down around 6.2%. In Hong Kong, the market there down also around 9.5%, following on from what was seen in Europe. The US Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill, he's in Japan at the moment and is to return to the United States. He's had discussions not only with the chairman of the Fed, Alan Greenspan, but with the various securities regulators. Their key goal now, of course, to restore confidence in the system, to maintain confidence in the business and markets of the United States. And to do that, the Fed has made it clear it will pump whatever money is necessary or needed into the system.